also 4,000 further manufacturing jobs in the Welsh economy now than there were last year. Manufacturing employers would like to see a deal with the European Union. Maybe the Honourable Lady needs to explain why she has voted against a deal with the European Union, and furthermore, the Honourable Lady needs to explain why she is rejecting the will of the Welsh people who voted in stronger numbers than the UK average to leave the European Union.
Thank you, Ryan Davis.
Mr. Speaker, number 2.
Mr. Speaker, the Government is clear that the best outcome for Wales and the Welsh economy is that the UK leaves the European Union in an orderly manner with a deal. That's why I have voted for one on 3 separate occasions.
Thank you, Ryan Davis.
Mr. Speaker, the Secretary of State knows that if we stay within the EU, British people will get a 20% uplift in structural funding to £440 per person. Can he ensure that in the event we do leave with a deal, that that money is sustained completely with the new UK Prosperity Fund? And furthermore, if we have a no deal, that there will be simply no structural funding, we'll hit a cliff edge, and more people like TART, Airbus and Ford will leave on his watch.
Mr. Speaker, I don't think I recognised any of the comments that came out from the honourable member's minds. The one question I will ask the honourable member, though, does he recognise that Swansea voted to leave the European Union in higher numbers than the national average, and why does he reject the will of his constituents?
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many Welsh businesses will be able to cope with a no-deal Brexit, but one sector that he and I know will not be able to cope is sheep farming. So would the Secretary of State confirm whether he's had any discussions with the DEFRA Secretary about an income protection measure or a compensation package for hill farmers when their industry gets decimated under a no-deal Brexit?
Well, my right honourable friend makes an extremely important point, and he highlights the importance of the agriculture sector and specifically sheep farming to the Welsh economy. Now, clearly, it is our will to want to protect that sector in every best possible way that we can, but the best way to protect that sector is to get a deal with the European Union. Clearly, I have voted on 3 separate occasions of the deal. I think the members opposite need to explain why they have voted against the deal, because by definition, that creates a higher chance of leaving the European Union without a deal, and they would need to explain that to their constituents.
Chris Evans.
I met yesterday with a managing director of a local manufacturing company who imports most of his goods through ports. He's stockpiling raw material at the moment, which is affecting his cash flow and is also affecting his future plans. Now, the Secretary of State went to Holyhead and did speak of the importance of ports in April and said we need a deal. Now he has said recently we need to prepare for a no deal. I have to tell him the comments he made has deeply concerned that CEO, and I was wondering if we do end up with a no deal, what will he have to say to him?
Mr. Speaker, I want a deal with the European Union. I have voted on 3 separate occasions for a deal with the European Union. And I would suspect that the employer at the ports that the honourable member has spoken to would have supported a deal with the European Union. So maybe he should have explained why he voted against that, because that has clearly increased the uncertainty. Uncertainty is not good for anyone, but I think the honourable member needs to look at himself and his colleagues of why they voted to block a deal.
Well done. Very good.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Along with the Secretary of State, I supported the withdrawal agreement the 3 times it came before Parliament because of its impact on my constituency and in particular on the sheep farming industry. Now, will the Secretary of State go to the Royal Welsh Show and explain to the farming unions that he and I and both of the candidates who might be Prime Minister are very supportive of reaching a deal with the European Union that will protect the future of my constituency and the sheep farming industry in particular?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I pay tribute to my honourable friend for his strong record in this area. Yes, I will be. I'm looking forward to my visit to the Royal Welsh Show. That will give me an opportunity to continue my ongoing proactive dialogue with the agriculture sector and with the farming unions in particular. I have spoken to both leadership candidates, and both recognise the importance of agriculture to the UK economy and the significance of the agriculture sector in Wales, and believe it is best to leave the European Union without a deal, but will take positive steps to protect the industries in the absence of a deal.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Brexit has serious implications for Welsh farmers, with an average of 80% of a farmer's income in Wales coming from direct payments received through the EU's Common Agricultural Policy. The Secretary of State is backing a contender for the Prime Minister who, during the referendum campaign, promised farmers their subsidies will remain as they are after Brexit. Can the Secretary of State give a guarantee that the member for Uxbridge and South Russell will not pursue any Brexit policy that harms the lives and the livelihoods of farmers and impacts on the agricultural sector?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm excited about our prospects outside the European Union. It's clearly, having had the privilege of travelling internationally, there was a deal agreed last week between China and the UK in terms of beef exports. We'll continue our dialogues in relation to other products and foodstuffs. That demonstrates the markets that are available. But the honourable member is absolutely right. It is better to get a deal with the European Union, because that will give us a smooth and orderly exit. But of course, if he will continually vote against the deal with the European Union, by definition he will increase the chances of a no deal.
Roberts.
The Secretary of State is easy about a no-deal Brexit, which threatens to create a perfect storm for sheep farmers in Wales, and his government is going to have to own it. Tariffs of 46% are set to kick in on October the 31st, exactly to coincide with the season when mountain lambs come to market for export. Now, there's a mart in Bala on October the 31st. Will he join me in Bala and tell farmers to their face why the value of their lambs has gone through the floor?
I would remind the Right Honourable Lady that farming unions in Wales strongly supported the deal that the Prime Minister and the European Commission agreed. Would she stand at their mart and look them in the eye and say that she voted against their wishes and that she voted for a no-deal position, because that's exactly what she did on 3 separate occasions?
Secretary of State failing to take responsibility then, and he talks up the threadbare benefits of his insular union while denigrating the real rewards of the European Union. Now, the majority of Tory party members would sacrifice the United Kingdom for Brexit. And will he tell me, therefore, which is closest to his heart? His beloved Brexit, on which his career depends, or his precious union?
Mr Speaker, there's no doubt that Wales prospers fantastically with being part of the United Kingdom, and there are great opportunities for the United Kingdom outside of the European Union. But I want to maintain a very close trading relationship with the European Union, and that's why I would strongly prefer to have a deal. But the Honourable Lady, as a passionate Welsh lady, the Right Honourable Lady will recognise that Wales voted to leave the European Union. We are trying to honour the outcome of the referendum, but also maintain a close trading relationship so that those farmers, those manufacturers and those service providers in Wales can continue to trade with the European Union and globally.
Speaker.
Mr Foster.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with your permission, I will answer questions 3 and 4 together. We continue to work closely with colleagues across both the UK and Welsh Government to ensure the industrial strategy continues to deliver for Wales. We have already made funding available for a number of projects for Wales, including recently providing a further £1.4 million to support innovative battery technology through the Faraday Battery Challenge.
Ms McInnes.
Would the Minister confirm that by refusing to invest in major opportunities such as the Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon, that the UK Government is denying the Welsh steel industry a significant opportunity to innovate and create quality jobs that support a new industry with global growth potential?
Thank you. Mr Speaker, I'm afraid I wouldn't recognise the description that's been given the National Infrastructure Commission supported our decision. And also in relation to the Tidal Bay Lagoon project, it's worth noting it's been a 3 times more expensive way of producing electricity than other alternatives.
Ian Mearns.
Mr Speaker, in the light of the very concerning news about the number of jobs that could be lost in the Ford engine plant in Bridgend, and reports of the impact that similar announcements by Nissan in my region and Honda will have on the supply chain companies in Wales, what assessment has the Secretary of State made of the impact Brexit is already having on the automotive sector in Wales? And will the Secretary of State outline what discussions he has had with BEIS to provide support to the sector in Wales via the industrial strategy?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it's first worth saying that Ford have said this decision is not linked to Brexit, although if members opposite are interested in the views of Ford, of course, they said to vote for the deal on Friday the 29th of March. But I'd also be clear that positive news, and only this month we've seen Aston Martin start production of a new line of vehicles in St Athan in South Wales, in the Secretary of State's constituency, showing what can be done when there is positive work on behalf of local people.
Rain.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the design of the Shared Prosperity Fund will be crucial to Wales's industrial strategy. Community and business shareholders are clear on what the fund should look like, not a penny less nor a power lost for Wales. The consultation on the fund was in the 2017 Conservative Manifesto, in a written statement in July of last year, and by the Secretary of State himself at this dispatch box in October of last year. Can the Secretary of State or can the Minister confirm that this consultation has now been withdrawn?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We continue to work on the shape of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund after Britain leaves the European Union, and we look forward to bringing forward more information in the spending review later this year.
Bryant.
5, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with permission, I will answer questions 5 and 10 together. We have regular discussions with the Welsh Government's Minister for Economy and Transport on a range of matters, including infrastructure in Wales. We are committed to ensuring that Wales prospers on the back of a strong and resilient infrastructure base, supported for our modern industrial strategy and National Infrastructure Delivery Plan.
Brian.
Assembly Government has good plans for the Treherbert line, which serves the Rhondda Fawr. But people who live in the Rhondda Fach and people who live at the top end of the Rhondda Fawr, who need to go over the Rickross to work, or for that matter to the maternity unit at Prince Charles Hospital, really need significant investment in the roads. It must surely be unfair that it takes many people in the Rhondda, including expectant mothers, 4 buses, to get to the hospital, and that might mean that a woman wouldn't get there in time to deliver safely, and that babies might not live.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recognise the strength with which the honourable member has put forward his constituent's case, and certainly would be happy to meet with him to discuss the issues that are there. And particularly, I would say roads and highways obviously in the devolved space, but certainly be more than happy to meet with him and see what we can do to support his ports.
The European Regional Development Fund has made a huge contribution to the development of infrastructure in Wales. Will he give a commitment when it comes to the new Shared Prosperity Fund that a commitment will be given for the allocation of resources on a basis of need and not through competition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the future of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, I touched on in an earlier answer, is something we'll do through consultation and through the comprehensive spending review later this year. But I tell you what would make a huge difference to roads in South Wales would be getting the M4 Relief Road back on track. Because if it was our decision, the Wales would now be on the highway to the future. Sadly, as it's a devolved one, it's now on the road to nowhere.
Michael Fabricant.
2 years ago, there was no broadband at all in the Dysynni Valley in Gwynedd in the Honourable Lady's constituency. Now there is fibre direct to the premises, delivering a minimum of 75 megabits download. What more can the United Kingdom government do to deliver high-speed broadband to rural Welsh businesses?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. At autumn budget, we announced £200 million for the hardest to reach areas, and Wales will be included in the first phase of this work. And also tomorrow, I will be in Wales with my counterpart in the Welsh Government talking about the North Wales Growth Deal, where digital connectivity is a key part of it. And we've already, in addition to the funds in the Growth Deal, there'll be £8 million from the local Full Fibre Networks Challenge Fund to support increased connectivity.
Infrastructure is essential to the economy of Wales and the United Kingdom, and the Holyhead Port is the gateway from the Republic of Ireland. What discussions has his department had with the Irish government to ensure there are adequate facilities in place for Brexit? Because the Irish government are planning to detour freight direct to mainland Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the honourable gentleman will be pleased to know there is ongoing discussions with the Irish government to ensure in whatever scenario for Brexit that there isn't so much disruption at Holyhead. He'll also be pleased to note that tomorrow, when I'm discussing the North Wales Growth Deal, that potential investment in Holyhead's port is part of that.
Umpires Club.
6, Mr. Speaker.
The Government is extremely supportive of the Welsh steel sector. Since the European Commission blocked the ThyssenKrupp joint venture, I've met with unions management to discuss the challenges and opportunities.
Tom Pesclove.
I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for that answer, and as well as the success of the industrial strategy in supporting UK steelmaking and the adoption of the new UK Steel Charter, what more does he think that we can do to support and promote the whole UK steel supply chain through the GREAT campaign?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I again pay tribute to the honourable member's role in supporting the steel sector in Corby, and he will be well aware that there are 5 major steel producers have come together, and the Government is supporting a sustained manufacturing hub led by Swansea University, which will not only be a direct benefit to the steel industry in Wales, but will have a significant impact on the steel sector in his constituency, and that demonstrates a great strength of the industrial strategy.
Jessica Morden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tata's Cogent Power in my constituency has huge potential to develop electrical steel in the automotive industry and electrification, but they need government to support to help develop the supply chain, which I wrote to the Secretary of State about recently. Would the Secretary of State come and see for himself and visit the ore plant? Hear, hear.
Well, I'd be happy to support the Honourable Lady and to support Orby Newport. It's an important site. It employs 350 people, and I think as the manufacturing sector is doing well in Wales, I think there's a great future for the plant.
Karen Smith.
7, Mr. Speaker.
Go on, Karen.
Number 7, Karen Smith.
What question are we? What question? 7. I'm extremely disappointed with Ford's intention to close its plant in Bridgend in 2020. However, this bad news is not a reflection of the Welsh economy as a whole.
Karen Smith.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no wonder he didn't want to answer the question, because the government is being totally complacent.
That's right, Karen.
I have no doubt that the closure of the Ford plant in Bridgend will have huge consequences along the M4 corridor, damaging our economy, including in Bristol South. Now, can I ask the Minister, just when will we see the start of any kind of industrial strategy? Because right now, with continued closures, the impact that this closure has on the supply chain, we are going backwards, not forward, and that damages the economy in Bristol South.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the manufacturing sector is extremely important to the UK economy, but to Wales specifically. There are 4,000 more manufacturing jobs in the Welsh economy now than there were this time last year, but that is not to undermine the importance of those 4 jobs. The Welsh Government and I are working closely together. We've commissioned Richard Parry-Jones to come up with some recommendations as to how we can best promote it, but I'm encouraged by the early discussions we've had with potential investors. Some of those discussions are more mature than others, but of course the Honourable Lady should recognise that they will be private and confidential at this stage.
James Gray.
Speaker, I join the Minister and the Honourable Lady in her deep disappointment at the closure of the Ford factory in Bridgend. But would he not agree with me that there's huge potential down the M4 corridor for the development of electric cars and automotive technology of all kinds, right down as far as my own constituency in Wiltshire?
The Honourable Member makes an extremely important point, because the UK's industrial strategy has invested £1.5 billion into automotive R&D to ensure that we are maximising the opportunities of the shift from petrol and diesel engines to electric vehicles. And a great demonstration of the success of that is that 20% of electric vehicles sold in Europe are manufactured here in the UK.
And Fluid.
Can I pay tribute, Mr. Speaker, to the Right Honourable Member for the proactive approach she is taking to redevelop this site. It's been outstanding. It's been an outstanding issue for decades, and I was pleased to be able to bring together the current owners of the site with the Right Honourable Lady in order to come forward with a positive plan for the future.
And I want to thank the Secretary of State for Wales for coming to the area, for knocking heads together in a way that we waited for 30 years. The people of Abercwmboi have lived in dirt, dust on the site of what was the worst industrial polluter in the whole of Britain. And I'm grateful for the interest he's taken and the way he's managed to knock heads together.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to the Right Honourable Lady? She has highlighted this issue for some time. I'm keen to work closely with her in order to bring the landowners together and to see what plans can be done. The local authority are playing a key part. We need to establish a clear plan of action, and we're well on our way to delivering that.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member for the constructive approach he has taken to working with all partners involved in the Mid Wales Growth Deal. My ministerial colleague in the other place has undertaken extensive engagement with local authorities and the private sector in Mid Wales, most recently at Welshpool on the 26th of May 2019.
The University of Aberystwyth and the internationally acclaimed institution of IBERS are both key partners in the Mid Wales Growth Deal, and the facilities of the new innovation campus at Gaerwen will both cement their place as leaders in the areas of agri-food and biotechnology, and also allow the area to become the centre for expertise in controlled environment agriculture and vertical farming. Now, the benefits this would bring to the agricultural industry are significant. But rather than take my word for it, would the Minister consider visiting the campus at Gaerwen so that he can see for himself the world-leading research that is being undertaken in Ceredigion?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly have an invite I think the Welsh Office Minister would find hard to refuse, and we'll try and coordinate. But I think it is vital that the Mid Wales Growth Deal focuses on sectors such as agri-tech, where there is a significant opportunity to introduce transformational economic change. We encourage our partners to work closely with research institutions such as IBERS to put together a compelling case to both governments.
Tanmanjeet Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Given that a Western Rail link to Heathrow would connect South Wales stations such as Swansea, Cardiff and Newport directly to Heathrow, cut up to half an hour off journey times, and mean London and South Wales would be better connected, benefiting businesses, tourists and the Welsh economy.
Very well done. I think we've blurted out, man.
What representations has the Secretary of State personally made to the Chancellor and the Department for Transport to support this scheme?
To say question 13, but he was so overcome with excitement that he neglected to do so. Never mind, we'll take it as part of 12. Minister, we're grateful.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member opposite will know, I'm quite a fan of the potential benefits of the Western Rail access to Heathrow, and potentially it could unlock more growth and opportunities across the great areas served by Great Western. And regular representations are made, and I'm sure the Chancellor who's now on the bench would have heard those he's just made.
Well done. Chris Elmore!
The reality is, with Ford with the potential closures, 1,700 jobs gone, between 6,000 and 7,000 in the supply chain. It's no good the Secretary of State saying manufacturing is buoyant with all these potential job closures coming. We need economic stimulus packages from the UK government in support of Welsh Government. What is the Minister going to do about it to protect these jobs?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the government's active in terms of ensuring there is economic development in Wales, but I would say the honourable member opposite might wish to reflect on what was said by a Welsh Government Minister yesterday in relation to how they know about what's going on.
Finally, Carol Monaghan.
Mr. Speaker, number 14.
50. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UK Government's extensive network of diplomatic staff regularly provides support to the Welsh ministers for overseas visit relating to devolved matters. However, we will not support activities intended to undermine the United Kingdom.
Carol Monaghan.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this month, the Foreign Office blocked diplomatic assistance to First Ministers of Wales and Scotland. In light of this action, which was an affront to our democratically elected First Ministers, can the Secretary of State explain how this United Kingdom is a partner of equals?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We will always provide the extensive network of FCO posts abroad and the offices of the Department of International Trade to support those representations from devolved areas. But what we will do is we will be a platform for the success of Wales, not for separatism in Scotland.
Congratulate the honourable gentleman, who I think is proudly sporting a free Nazanin badge, accompanied by many colleagues on that matter, I think. Mr. Ian C. Lucas.
I've received excellent support from the diplomatic service abroad when I was the Shadow Middle East Minister. Can I commend the diplomatic service working closely with all elected members of Parliament and of assemblies and of the Scottish Parliament to preserve the integrity and strength of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to hear the honourable member's experience, and as said before, we will always look to provide support to promote the success of Wales and the success of this United Kingdom. What we won't do is look to undermine it.
Thank you. Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Thangham Debonair.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure that the whole House will want to join me in wishing the England football team the very best for their game against Norway tomorrow. Mr. Speaker, this morning my office hosted a reception to mark Armed Forces Reserves Day, and this coming Saturday we celebrate Armed Forces Day. This is an opportunity for us all to pay tribute to our servicemen and women here and around the world for their dedication and service, and to those who have served in previous generations. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Later today, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, and I will travel to Japan for the G20 Leaders Summit. With the threat of climate change putting future generations at risk, vile terrorist propaganda continuing to spread online, and rising tensions in the Gulf, this summit is an opportunity to address global challenges affecting all our nations.
As the thousands of people demonstrating outside will tell you, tackling climate change and biodiversity makes the world safer, more beautiful and sustainable for our children and grandchildren. Does the Prime Minister agree that one of the first acts of the next Prime Minister should be, urgently, a new Environment and Climate Change Bill, putting into place all the recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change to meet net carbon zero, making the world a more beautiful place?
Can I say to the honourable lady that we are introducing an environment bill as a government. We've introduced a 25-year environment plan. I think for the first time that any government has done that. We've committed to net zero emissions by 2050. That has gone through this House. But the question she needs to think about is why is the Labour Party in the House of Lords trying to block the net zero and 2050 legislation?
Julian Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the biggest restraints on what is a very positive economy in York and North Yorkshire is the lack of progress on devolution. Following the rejection of the One Yorkshire proposal, does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need to have a more local approach, such as a York and North Yorkshire deal, to rival those of the big urban centres?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I absolutely recognise, as we do across government, the enthusiasm and dedication in Yorkshire for devolution and the potential seen there for harnessing local people's sense of identity with Yorkshire. And we share the ambition of doing what is best for Yorkshire, its people and its businesses. My right honourable friend, the Communities Secretary, has now met with Yorkshire leaders. Discussions are continuing about a different localist approach to devolution, and officials are having initial meetings with councils, including York, and will be interested in hearing their ambitions for devolution.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope the whole House will welcome today's mass climate lobby that's coming to Parliament today. And we should be proud of it. This House, after all, became the first Parliament in the world to declare a climate emergency. And I want to pay tribute to the young people and young climate strikers that have done so much to raise awareness of this issue. And I hope members will take the chance today to meet those that are coming to lobby and learn from them, because they feel very passionately on the issue. I also acknowledge it's Armed Forces Day and the celebrations are going on this week, and I think we should be concerned about the welfare of both serving and former serving members of our armed forces. And I join the Prime Minister in congratulating the Lionesses for reaching the quarter-finals of the Women's World Cup and wish them well tomorrow night against Norway. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the judgment of the Court of Appeal last Thursday against UK arms sales to Saudi Arabia. The court found that the government had, and I quote, made no concluded assessments of whether the Saudi-led coalition had committed violations of international humanitarian law during the Yemen conflict and made no attempt to do so. Does the Prime Minister dispute that finding?
Here we go. We continue to operate one of the most robust arms export control regimes in the world. And we take our responsibilities on arms export licensing very seriously. Indeed, in the words of the 2017 judgment, the government engaged in anxious scrutiny, indeed at what seems like anguished scrutiny at some stages. We're disappointed that the court found against the government on one ground, and we will be seeking permission to appeal this judgment.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, Germany, as an EU member state, has banned arms exports to Saudi Arabia. So has Denmark, and both the US Senate and House of Representatives have voted to ban arms exports as well. The UN describes the situation in Yemen as, and I quote, humanity's biggest preventable disaster, and the government sees fit to continue selling arms to Saudi Arabia during that situation. So can I ask the Prime Minister a very simple question? Does she believe there are serious ongoing violations of international humanitarian law by Saudi Arabia in Yemen? Yes or no?
Yes. The right honourable gentleman knows very well that we consider these issues very carefully when we are dealing with these arms export licences, as has just been quoted by the court. But he references the situation in Yemen. This cannot go on. We need a political settlement in Yemen. I would remind the right honourable gentleman that the Saudi-led intervention was at the request of the legitimate president of the Yemen, following a rebel insurgency which overthrew the internationally recognised government, and the intervention has been acknowledged by the United Nations. Now, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, held a Yemen Quad meeting on Saturday, expressing concerns at escalating tensions. But what do we see the Labour Party do? One of his MPs was inviting rebel leaders of the insurgency into the House of Commons. Yet again, Labour on the wrong side of the argument.
Jeremy Corbyn.
The Prime Minister doesn't appear to understand the depth of feeling at the UN, parliaments around the world, and even the US Senate and House on this situation. The UN itself has warned that by the end of 2019, if the war continues, 230,000 people would have lost their lives, 140,000 of which are children under the age of 5. The UK and EU law states that the government must, and I quote, not grant a licence if there is a clear risk that the items used might be used in the commission of a serious violation of international humanitarian law. The government said they'd used the following criteria to judge that, and I quote, an understanding of Saudi military procedures, continuing engagement with the Saudis at the highest level, and Saudi public commitments to international humanitarian law. So if the Saudi government says they're respecting human rights, do we then ignore all evidence on the ground in Yemen and continue to sell weapons to this regime, which has led to this appalling death toll already in this conflict?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, first of all, as I've made clear, we're seeking permission to appeal the recent judgment. But the judgment isn't about whether the government made the right or wrong decisions, but about the decision-making process and whether it was rational. So we are considering the implications of the judgment alongside the permission to appeal that we're seeking. And while we do this, we won't grant any new licences for exports to Saudi Arabia and its coalition partners, which might be used in the conflict in Yemen. But he talks about the conflict in Yemen. As I've just said, let's remember what happened, why we are seeing this conflict in Yemen. It was the overthrow of the internationally recognised government by rebel insurgents. We are all concerned. We are all concerned. We are all concerned about the humanitarian situation in Yemen. That is, the Shadow Foreign Secretary might like, actually, as this is an area of concern to her, remit, to actually listen to what the government is doing.
Order. The questions must be heard and the answers must be heard. The Prime Minister.
We are all concerned about the humanitarian situation in the Yemen. That is why, since the start of the conflict in 2015, our total commitment to Yemen, it now stands at £770 million. We are one of the major contributors to support for the humanitarian effort. Ultimately, The only way to resolve this issue is through a political settlement, and that is why we are supporting the efforts of the UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths.
Corbyn! If that's the case, why is the government appealing the judgment instead of promoting a peace settlement in Yemen? Since 2016, Mr. Speaker, for 3 years, United Nations experts have been saying that the Saudi coalition has violated international humanitarian law in Yemen. This air campaign has killed tens of thousands and injured and displaced many more. The government says there can be no military solution to this particular conflict. There can only be a negotiated and political solution. If that is the case, why have they pumped £4.6 billion of military equipment into this brutal bombardment already?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, what we do believe, as I've just said, I've said in answer to his last question, I said it, I think, in answer to the first question that he gave me, that the only way to ensure the security and stability of Yemen for the future is through a political settlement. That is why this government is supporting the work that is being done by the UN Special Envoy Martin Griffiths. That is why we are continuing to use our diplomatic efforts, including, as I said, the Foreign Secretary holding a Yemen Quad on Saturday, to encourage others around the table. We are very clear. We support the efforts to secure the agreement by the parties to the conflict to implement the Stockholm agreements. That is an important part of the process leading to peace and a political solution. We need to ensure that work is essential so that progress can be made at the next round of peace talks and so that humanitarian supply lines can be opened up.
Jeremy Corbyn.
It was her Trade Secretary who said there couldn't be a military solution to this conflict. Surely the government should think on this and stop the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia. Just last week, the UN Special Rapporteur, Agnes Kalamard, said there is credible evidence that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and other high-level officials are personally responsible for the horrific murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Does the Prime Minister accept that assessment?
I say to the right honourable gentleman, we do want to see accountability for this horrific murder. I raised the death of Jamal Khashoggi with King Salman at the Sharm summit. That's the second time I've done so. I've raised it with the Crown Prince at the G20 last year. I've stressed the importance of those responsible being held to account, of due process being followed. We expect Saudi Arabia to take the action necessary to ensure such violations of international and national laws can't happen again. The right direction, the right way to take this is through a judicial process, and we're obviously closely following the continuing investigation. We expect it to proceed in line with internationally recognised legal standards.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, there is overwhelming evidence that war crimes have been committed in Yemen by Saudi Arabian forces. A state that flouts every human rights norm at home and abroad. Its government believes that it can kill with impunity journalists or civil rights campaigners, Yemenis or Bahrainis. It funds extremism around the world. But the UK has supplied them with over £4.5 billion worth of deadly weapons. UK weapons which have been used in indiscriminate attacks on civilians in which over 200,000 people have been killed. And hundreds of thousands more stand on the brink of famine, of starvation and of death from wholly preventable diseases. Surely, Mr. Speaker, the Court of Appeal judgment should be a wake-up call to the Prime Minister and the government. So instead of appealing the judgment, why not accept the judgment and stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia now and bring about peace in the Yemen and save those lives?
The right honourable gentleman says to me, bring about peace in the Yemen. It's exactly what we are working with our international partners to do through the United Nations and through the Yemen Quad. But also the right honourable gentleman is talking about the relations that we have with Saudi Arabia. That is a relationship that has saved lives of British citizens in the past. But let's just look at some of the relationships that the right honourable gentleman supports. When people were killed in Salisbury, his sympathies were with Russia. When terrorists were killing our people, his sympathies were with the IRA. And in the recent tanker attacks in the Gulf, his sympathies were with Iran. He never backs Britain, and he should never be Prime Minister.
Mr. Bradley!
I'm a firm believer that youth work is part of the answer to so many issues in our society and has a huge role to play in my Mansfield constituency, but currently we're at risk of losing vital youth work qualifications. The review of these qualifications was announced on April the 1st, but the funding has been delayed in the system. If it's not secured, we're in danger of seeing universities and colleges drop these qualifications from 2020. So will my right honourable friend ensure that this funding is signed off immediately so we can continue to train amazing youth workers?
Yeah. Well, my honourable friend has raised an important issue and the importance of the proper training of these youth workers. We are absolutely committed to properly qualified and trained youth sector. Subject to a business case, we have committed to renewing funding for these qualifications and reviewing the youth work curriculum. I know DCMS are in very close contact with the National Youth Agency and aware of the timing issues and hope to make an announcement on this in the near future.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister with our reservists? I am happy today to be supporting a badge on supporting Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, and I hope in the days that the Prime Minister has left in office she will do what she can to secure the release of Nazin from jail in Iran. And I hope the Prime Minister will join many of us outside Parliament today in support of the climate justice activists. And I have to say to the Leader of the Opposition that it was the Scottish Government that was the first government in the UK to declare a climate emergency. And I hope that the UK responds to the leadership that Scotland is giving on this issue. Mr. Speaker, do or die, come what may. Those are the words of the Prime Minister's likely successor. The truth behind the Brexit chaos in the Tory party is encompassed in those words. The Tory dream is to drag us out of the European Union no matter what the cost. Prime Minister, before you exit office, will you pledge to never vote for a successor willing to impose a devastating no-deal Brexit on all of us?
Well, I have to remind the right honourable gentleman yet again that he is due to ask me questions about my responsibilities as Prime Minister. And I would remind him yet again that as Prime Minister, I voted 3 times in this House to ensure that we could take the UK out of the European Union with a deal that was good for the whole of the United Kingdom, and he voted effectively for no deal.
Ian Blackford. My goodness, it's no wonder she's leaving. That was no answer to a question. The Prime Minister is showing gross cowardice. On the one hand, the Tories are asking people to put their faith in the most incompetent Foreign Secretary in a century, a man who has made a career out of lying, who has spent his week avoiding the media, staging photos and playing to the extreme delusions of the Tory shires. On the other hand, we have the most incompetent Health Secretary in our history. A man who writes books on privatising our NHS. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives clearly don't like the truth. Someone so desperate for a chance as his 30-year Downing Street fantasy that he's...
I think the right honourable gentleman's concluded his inquiry. Well, if he... Order! If he hasn't, he needs to do so in a single sentence. Order! Mr. Cowan, I'm sure you're a well-intentioned fellow, but I require no counsel from you. One sentence. We've got a lot of questions to get through. A sentence. Well done. Mr. Blackford.
Mr. Speaker, in her last days in office, will she finally act in the best interest of these islands, not the Conservative Party, and admit that neither of the candidates for office should ever be elected Prime Minister?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, either of the candidates for this high office would do a darn sight better job than anybody sitting on any of those benches.
Sarah Newton!
welcome the announcements that the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions made yesterday. Would my right honourable friend update the House about some of those plans and how she feels that they will enable more people living with disabilities and health conditions to play their full part in our society?
Well, can I first of all thank my honourable friend for the work that she did as Minister for Disabled People, which sets a lot of the groundwork for the announcement we've been able to make on the disability strategy. There are many disabled people in our society who would love to actually be able to get into the workplace. One of the key issues underpinning that strategy is support for people to enable them to take their full role in society, to get into the workplace, to ensure they have access to the support that they need. I'm very proud of the fact that something like 950,000 more disabled people are now in the workplace, thanks to the actions of Conservatives in government. There is more for us to do. The disability strategy sets our path to do that and enable disabled people to play their full role in our society.
Caroline Flint.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Almost every infrastructure project across the UK requires British-made steel. The contracts for the next 5 years alone are worth £1 billion. But yesterday, UK Steel and Community Trade Union members were asking me if the Scunthorpe Steelworks will still be working in 5 days' time. Will the Prime Minister guarantee that a month from now, before she leaves office, the Scunthorpe Steelworks will still be open?
Well, can I say to the Right Honourable Lady, we are concerned about the situation in relation to the Scunthorpe Works, in relation to British Steel. That's why my Right Honourable friend, the Business Secretary, is engaging actively with the official receiver. Obviously, the official receiver has a responsibility in relation to this matter, but we are doing all that we can as a government. And I was pleased to meet with, obviously, as she knows, a number of members of Parliament who have steel interests in their constituencies to talk about the real impact that the closure of the works would have on people. That's why we're working so actively to try to ensure that we can retain employment in that area.
Duella Braverman.
Mr. Speaker, I'm due to give birth any day now. I'm hoping there won't be an emergency in the Commons. But can I just put on record my thanks to you, the former Leader of the House, this Government and cross-party MPs who have delivered the proxy voting scheme, which will enable my constituents to be represented during my maternity leave. Mr. Speaker, 11-year-old Ruby Lloyd from Hook with Warsash Primary School is campaigning for a pedestrian crossing on Warsash Road to encourage more pupils to walk to school, thereby improving road safety and air quality. Hundreds of local residents support her campaign, her headmistress supports her campaign, and so do her councillors. Will my right honourable friend get behind Ruby's campaign for safer roads in Fairley?
Can I first of all say to my honourable friend that we wish her the very best for the upcoming birth. And can I also say that I have a certain satisfaction having played a little role in ensuring that she and her husband actually got married, as she acknowledges. Can I say on the issue that she has referred to of Ruby? First of all, it's very good to see young people caring passionately about their local area and campaigning for their local area. And it's vital, obviously, that children can go to school in a safe environment. Of course, this is an issue for the local authority, but I would just like to wish Ruby the very best for her campaign.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Universal credit is causing great hardship in my constituency. It is driving up debt, it is increasing food bank use, it is making people who are out of work worse off and people who are in work worse off. In her final weeks in office, will she act to halt the rollout of this failed policy, or will she simply leave this injustice burning?
I just say to the honourable gentleman, what lay behind universal credit was changing our benefit system. The legacy system we inherited from the Labour Party was one where over 1 million people were left on benefits for nearly a decade. What universal credit does is helps people into work and ensures that when they are in work, they are able to earn more. 200,000 more people in work. 1 million disabled people getting more money as a result of universal credit. 700,000 people getting the benefits they are entitled to as a result of universal credit. This is a policy that is working.
Paul Masterton.
Speaker, I know we're coming up to one of your favourite times of the year with Wimbledon starting next week, and many members have already been enjoying hitting a few balls on the court in New Palace Yard. So will my right honourable friend take this opportunity to wish all the British players the best of luck in the championships, and also welcome the announcement from the Lawn Tennis Association of £250 million for 96 new indoor tennis centres to open up the sport to 3 million more people across the UK.
Yeah. Well, can I thank my honourable friend for in a very timely fashion raising this issue. I certainly wish all the very best to all the British players who will be participating in Wimbledon. I'd like to congratulate Andy Murray for his win in the doubles at Queen's at the weekend. I understand that there is an exhibition of tennis taking place here in Parliament today with the Paddock School from Putney taking part in that, and it's very good to see young people having that experience and having that opportunity, and I welcome the LTA, the fact that the LTA is directing funding across the whole country to where it's needed most to grow the sport from the grassroots up.
Mr. Khalid Mahmood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent YouGov poll into Islamophobia within the Conservative Party shows an astounding level of racism. Almost 50% polled would not want to see a Muslim Prime Minister. Only 8% would be proud if there was one. 67% believe racist myths about Muslim communities, and yet 8 out of 10 don't think this is a problem. In light of this, and as one of her final acts of her premiership, will the Prime Minister finally agree to commission an external inquiry into Islamophobia within her increasingly nasty party?
I say to the honourable gentleman, we take any allegations of Islamophobia very seriously in the Conservative Party. Every allegation is properly investigated. We have seen my right honourable friend, the chairman of the Conservative Party, take swift action. We have seen people suspended from the party. We have seen people excluded from the party. And I would just say to the honourable gentleman that it is in direct contrast to the way in which the Labour Party deals with anti-Semitism. Indeed, it is easier to be kicked out of the Labour Party for voting Liberal Democrat than for being anti-Semitic.
Alistair Burt.
Speaker, there is a risk that complex conflicts thousands of miles away can sometimes appear deceptively simple at Westminster. Does my right honourable friend share my surprise that the Leader of the Opposition did not mention the Human Rights Watch had said last week that it was a potential war crime of Houthi drones targeting civilian targets in Saudi Arabia? And the World Food Programme has recently suspended aid in Houthi-controlled areas because of its diversion, aid workers not being allowed into Houthi areas, and aid being diverted to enrich Houthi forces. Is it not the case that it's best to recognise the horrors of war on all sides and concentrate not on being one-sided, but getting fully behind the tireless efforts of Martin Griffiths to seek peace in Yemen and support those efforts and bring this conflict to an end?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend with his experience in the Foreign Office. He has seen and knows the complexities of these issues, and he's absolutely right that it is important that we look at what is happening in the Yemen and we recognise the actions that the Houthis have been taking as well. That is why it is so important to bring both sides around the table to ensure that we can get that agreed peace settlement and find supporting Martin Griffiths, the UN Special Envoy, in his efforts to bring the parties around the table. And he references the humanitarian aid. I said earlier the extent of humanitarian aid we've given. One of the great problems we've had to address is the way in which it is not always possible to get that aid to the people who need it most. Not because of our inability, because of the insurgents, the way in which the Houthis are preventing that aid getting to the people who need it most.
Aaron Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Brexit uncertainty is hitting manufacturing businesses in my Lincoln constituency, and local managing directors have told me that no deal would be absolutely catastrophic for them, for their exports to Europe, and it will put local jobs at risk. One firm has even put workers on short-time working already, temporarily. Does the Prime Minister accept that her government, and I include in this statement either of her likely successors, have made a catastrophic no-deal Brexit a more likely outcome?
I wanted to deliver Brexit with a deal. I brought a deal to this House, and the Honourable Lady and her colleagues voted 3 times against that deal.
Andrew Griffiths.
On Monday, 160 years of food production on the same site in Burton ended with the announcement of the closure of the Kerry food plant in my constituency, affecting 900 jobs in both Burton and in the constituency of my friend from South Derbyshire. The Prime Minister will obviously have great sympathy for all of those workers who are concerned about their future, concerned about paying their mortgage, the holidays they have booked, and their families. Will she commit to a cross-department task force to try and help ensure we not only get those 900 people back into work, but we find a new use for that plant in Burton?
Yes. Well, obviously, as my honourable friend says, I'm sure this is going to be a very worrying time for the employees of Kerry Foods and their families. I understand that ministers from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy are speaking to my honourable friend to discuss the situation, and they will work with DEFRA and with housing communities and local government to explore the various options. We'll also want to work closely with businesses and local partners to ensure those affected are well supported, and indeed to explore options for the future of the site. And our thoughts are with those who will obviously be very concerned at this time.
J. Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, 7-year-old Talia Balade, who's the daughter of my constituent Gosia Simanovic, was abducted by her father and taken to Libya in 2012. The father returned here without Talia, and she remains in Libya with his mother. He was jailed but released on licence in 2017, and he's now absconded and is not reporting to the Home Office. All Gosia's legal avenues have been exhausted, and she is really desperate. Will the Prime Minister please use every channel available during her final weeks in office to secure Talia's return to her mother in the UK?
I say to the Honourable Lady, obviously she's outlined this case here in the House. I will ensure that this is a matter that is looked into properly by department concerned.
Andrew Mitchell.
Mr. Speaker, on the Yemen-Saudi catastrophe that is taking place, isn't it the case that Britain should move to a position of far greater neutrality, supporting a comprehensive ceasefire? And while Britain is absolutely right to condemn the Houthi attacks on Riyadh and Jeddah, should we not also condemn the night-after-night bombings by the Saudi aircraft, which are killing innocent civilians and radicalising tens of thousands of young Yemenis?
I say to my right honourable friend, we have called for a ceasefire. We've supported the efforts that have been made for a ceasefire. We've supported those efforts around Hodeidah, a very important port, obviously, for getting humanitarian relief in. But this is why it is so important that we continue to work with our international partners and with the UN Special Envoy to bring about that ceasefire, to enable the parties to come round the table, to get the political settlement, which is the only way to ensure the future security and stability of Yemen.
Kerry McCarthy.
On Friday, Mr. Speaker, a 14-year-old girl with autism and a learning disability was placed in a secure mental health unit 150 miles from home. Her mother's already had to stop work, and her parents are now trying to scrape together the money to find temporary accommodation there so they can be near their child. Does the Prime Minister not agree that we really need decent, trusted facilities in every community for distressed children so that families don't have to go through this?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes a very important point, and obviously the emphasis that we are putting in the National Health Service on dealing with mental health and on improving the support that is available to mental health is a part of this. We are looking, and I held a round table to looking at the outcomes of the review that we've had on the Mental Health Act, where exactly these sorts of issues about the type of circumstances in which people were being provided for was raised. And this is something that the NHS is looking at very carefully, and we are ensuring that there is funding available for further facilities to be provided.
Mary Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, this afternoon I will meet with my Cheadle constituents who have travelled down to Westminster as part of the Christian Aid climate change lobby. With her world-leading commitment to a net zero target by 2050, the Prime Minister has shown that we are already leading the way. As we leave the EU, will she also urge her successor to put the environment at the heart of the Brexit negotiations?
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for raising this issue, and can I also congratulate those of her Cheadle constituents who are coming down to Westminster today to discuss this very important issue. We will. The government has made a major step, as she says, by legislating for net zero. I hope that the Labour efforts to stop this in the House of Lords will not be successful, so that we can actually ensure that that legislation is signed. And we will make every effort as we leave the European Union, working with our European partners and others, to ensure that we put this at the forefront of discussions and that the right approach is taken to it by countries around the world.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that the Prime Minister is slightly distracted by the intoxicating emotion of imminent freedom and release. But while she's still running the country, could she spare a thought for the 1.3 million FOMOs in our nation? FOMOs, of course, being pensioner households missing out. And the Prime Minister will be aware that today that excellent charity, Independent Age, are actually seeking to support the campaign for the 3.5 million unclaimed pensioner benefits, according to the DWP's own figures. Would my honourable friend, would the Prime Minister agree with me that this 3.5 million should not be left to fructify in the coffers of the Treasury, but should flow to the FOMOs?
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, which was put with his normal and natural theatricality in the chamber. As he will have seen, the Chancellor of the Exchequer will actually have heard the question that he has put. Obviously, we want to ensure that people who are entitled to benefits actually are in receipt of those benefits. But I would also say to the honourable gentleman that this government can be proud of the record of what we have done for pensioners through the triple lock and various other ways, such that pensioners are £1,600 a year better off under this government.
Sir John Hayes.
Mr. Speaker, today's mass lobby is about sustainability, but there can be no economic health nor communal well-being while soulless supermarkets make places ubiquitous whilst exploiting my Lincolnshire farmers and growers, and while heartless internet giants crush their small competitors. So will the Prime Minister use the tax system to redistribute power away from those heartless, soulless corporate monoliths to all that is small and eclectic and local and particular? For, Mr. Speaker, as you know, Schumacher said, small is beautiful.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, he makes an important point about the importance of small businesses, the importance of local independent shops on our high street. We want to see those businesses supported. That is why, of course, we have taken steps already, for example, in relation to business rates. It's also why, for those who are concerned about the internet and the way the internet is being used to undermine some of those small businesses in terms of the retail environment, we are, of course, taking action in relation to those digital companies.
Evident code.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the Conservative Party leadership candidates tour the country offering unicorns, the Prime Minister may be thinking about her legacy. Will the Prime Minister please listen and act on the entirely reasonable demands of all those affected by Grenfell-related issues and finally commit to fund retrofitting of sprinklers on all residential buildings and others where vulnerable people live or work, give clarity on installation and upkeep of external building insulation, adequately fund our fire and rescue services, and set up a social housing regulator with teeth? The public may thank you for it.
That's right. Can I say to the Honourable Lady, obviously, we are looking across the board. There's a number of issues that have been raised as a result of the terrible tragedy that occurred at Grenfell Tower, which we have already acted on, and we are continuing to work, as I said, indicated in response to her Right Honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, last week. We are looking at issues such as social housing. I think while many people focus on the issue of cladding and the building standards, actually it was the fact that the people's voices were not being heard from that social housing. That is a particular concern, and ensuring we have the right approach in relation to regulation there is important. And on sprinklers, the recommendation after Lacanau was not that every property over a certain height should have sprinklers retrofitted, and it is important to be clear about that.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 15th of May, my right honourable friend welcomed a decision by NICE to allow the drug Spinraza, which is for spinal muscular atrophy, to be prescribed, including, we thought, to my constituent, the grandson of Mrs Ogborne. NICE has now written to Mrs Ogborne to say that they accept that the news story that appeared on the NICE website was not clear enough. That is code for saying my constituent's grandson will not receive this drug. When NICE says something, can it be ensured that it does it and that bureaucratic flannel does not raise people's hope then to dash it?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I'm very concerned to hear the case that he has brought before the House of his constituent, and in relation to Spinraza, I will ensure that this is looked into. If NICE says that Spinraza is available, then obviously it should stand by its word.
If the honourable gentleman doesn't get a result and he wants it to be debated again before the summer recess, let me tell him, it will be debated. He can be quite certain of that. Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In a recently aired BBC Scotland documentary on medical cannabis, the chair of the BPNA, Finbar O'Callaghan, said that the NHS will not pay for life-changing medical cannabis for epileptic children by saying, even if you prescribe the product, the NHS isn't going to pay for it. Is his statement correct, Prime Minister?
I've answered questions on this in the past, including, I think, from the Honourable Lady. The Government has changed the law. Specialist doctors on the General Medical Council Specialist Register can now prescribe cannabis-based products for medicinal use where there is clinical evidence of benefit. And NHS England and the Chief Medical Officer have made it clear that cannabis-based products can be prescribed for medicinal use in appropriate cases. But obviously we need to trust doctors to make clinical decisions in the best interests of patients.
Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, on Thursday I was able in the adjournment debate to describe the barbaric treatment that my father-in-law received at a clinic in Barbados that ultimately led to his death. Mr Speaker, it shows the influence of this chamber that I've been contacted by many people from around the country who now want to talk to me about similar issues. And this morning, Mr Speaker, I've been contacted by a resident of Barbados who has said to me that actually the practices that go on in this clinic by Dr Alfred Sparman are far more horrific than we would recognise. May I ask my right honourable friend if she'd either meet with me or the relevant department of government so that I may inquire as to how we can work with Barbadian authorities to shut this man down and make sure that what happened to my father-in-law cannot happen to any other citizen.
Well, can I say to my honourable friend, I remember the conversation he and I had when this happened in relation to his father-in-law and the obviously terrible tragedy that took place. I will certainly ensure that the proper department is able to ministers from the proper department are able to sit down with him and explore the issue that he has raised.
Thank you. Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Figures released today show there are currently £973 million worth of arrears owed under the Child Maintenance Service. And while new enforcement powers are welcome, CMS's bark continues to be worse than its bite. The UK Government must crack down on non-payment of maintenance to children and do it now. Will the Prime Minister agree to launch a full root and branch review of CMS to ensure a new strategy where maintenance payments are properly enforced and to lift these children who in many cases are in poverty because of lack of maintenance payments?
The Honourable Lady is right that we want to ensure that those maintenance payments are indeed made for those children, that people, normally it's fathers, but it can in some cases be mothers, but that they take their responsibilities seriously and recognise their responsibilities. This is a difficult area. For many years, efforts have been made by different governments to ensure that we get this right and that we ensure that those maintenance payments are made. I'm sure every member of this House has had constituency cases in relation to this issue. The simplified system that was brought in recent years, I think, has been working better than the previous system, but I'll ensure that the department, the relevant department, looks at the issue she's raised.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In Harlow, my constituency, many horses and ponies are tied up and tethered by the roadside, maltreated, put in dangerous locations, often without access to food and water. Will the Prime Minister work to end the suffering of these beautiful animals and amend the current outdated Animal Welfare Act and Code of Practice for the welfare of horses so that it clarifies what the government's powers are and what the duties of local authorities to intervene? And will she urge the RSPCA to treat this as a major concern?
Well, I think the honourable gentleman has raised an issue which is important. I will certainly ensure that the department looks at the issue that he's raised about the definitions in the legislation, and I would hope that the RSPCA would take this seriously, as seriously as they take the ill treatment of other animals.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week, a brain tumour ended the life of Sarah Wands from Markinch in my constituency. Sarah was 44 years old, a brilliantly gifted young mathematician and statistician, tiny in physical stature, but a towering giant if measured by any qualities that matter. Does the Prime Minister share my hope that funding for brain tumour research will be increased to bring forward the day that other families are not affected as the Wands family have been?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, obviously he's raised a very, very sad case, and a life that was full of, from what he says, was full of great promise, has been sadly cut short. And our thoughts and prayers are with the family of the individual concerned. We have been putting more money into research in relation to brain tumours. This is an important area. It is one on which my right honourable friend, the former Health Secretary, started some extra work being done within the NHS. That is continuing. But he's raised a very important issue, and as I say, our thoughts and prayers are with all those affected by this case.
Gillian Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 in 2 people in the UK now develop cancer at some point in their lifetimes, and around 60% of them will require radiotherapy as part of their treatment. In West Sussex, we don't have a single Linux machine, meaning my constituents travel long distances every day for treatment, and it's not only costly, but of course is gruelling when you are feeling so unwell. Can the Prime Minister outline what steps the government is taking to ensure my constituents have the same access to medical care as others in adjacent counties?
Well, I fully recognise the concern that the honourable lady has raised. Of course, looking at how we deal with cancer, how we treat cancer, is one of the issues in the NHS long-term plan, which the NHS is putting a focus on. I recognise the concern for those who have to travel long distances to receive this treatment. As my honourable friend has said, it's not just often expensive for them, but it is difficult for them and gruelling for them in their obviously at the in the state of health that they are, and this is something that I think will be looked at as part of the future programmes for the NHS.
Finally, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware, as indeed the whole House will be, of the long-standing campaign for justice and compensation by victims of the Libyan-sponsored IRA terrorism in Northern Ireland and indeed throughout the UK. US citizens have been compensated by the Libyan authorities, but the UK citizens have not. There are £12 billion held frozen in frozen assets in the United Kingdom. £17 million has been recovered in tax on that money in the last 3 years. Will she undertake to use that money to help the victims and ensure the special representative who has been appointed will work closely with the victims to obtain the justice that those victims rightly deserve?
The right honourable gentleman is absolutely right in raising the issue of the justice that these victims deserve. The issue he's raised is one that I have raised myself with the Libyan government in the past. I will certainly ensure that the special representative is able to make every effort to ensure that the victims get that to which they are entitled, and that he does work with the victims in doing that. It's important that their voice is an absolutely crucial part of this.
Order. Just before we come to the point of order, there's a very small number of announcements to make, the first of which draws upon and indirectly relates to something the Prime Minister said by way of expression of good wishes to the England female football team. I think that the House would want to know of the activities of the women's parliamentary football team, which are regularly communicated to me, not least because I am the president of the said team. I hope the whole House will wish to join me in wishing the women's parliamentary football team well at the weekend in its Guinness World Record attempt for the number of female footballers playing a game, this initiative being undertaken in collaboration with Equal Playing Field, whose mission is to challenge inequality in sport particularly for girls and women globally. Secondly, I remind the House that today marks the 40th anniversary of the House's decision to endorse the proposal from Norman St John Stevens, an extremely distinguished leader of this House, to establish the system of departmental select committees. Since that momentous decision on the 26th of June 1979, those committees have grown and developed into a key, I might almost be tempted to say the key means by which the House holds ministers to account in detail for their conduct of government. I hope colleagues will agree it's a decision that we should all celebrate. And finally, as I know there is very widespread concern in this House on the matter of human rights, I hope colleagues will be pleased later to welcome to our proceedings, indeed I think he can be welcomed now, the Sikyong of the Central Tibetan Administration, Lobsang Sangay, who's been here before and he's here again. He represents in a very important way the people of Tibet. We identify with you, sir. It's a pleasure to see you again, and I think colleagues will feel that way, and I'm looking forward to seeing you later today. Please continue your good and important work, even in the face of very considerable pressures. Point of order, Liz Saville Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr iawn. Mr Speaker, on Monday I received a letter from the Chief Whip confirming an intention to move the writ for the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election on Tuesday the 25th of June. Yesterday came and went, but no writ was moved. It was claimed that there was an issue with Powys Council and specifically the returning officer that was delaying the process. Powys Council confirmed within a matter of hours that this was not the case, and they themselves, Powys Council, were waiting for the writ to be moved. ITV Wales's political editor, Adrian Masters, has speculated that the government has not moved the writ for the Brecon and Radnorshire by-election, not because of problems in Powys, but because they couldn't guarantee that Powys would not, as is their right, hold an election on the 25th of July. The 25th of July being, of course, the first full day of the new Prime Minister's premiership. Now, Mr Speaker, could you confirm to me whether you have had notification that the government intends to move the writ today or continue to miss their own deadline and make highly questionable excuses for delaying the blushes of a new Prime Minister by delaying moving the writ?
Well, the Honourable Lady for her point of order, and to her for giving me notice of it. I was advised yesterday that the plan to move the writ yesterday had been aborted. Instead, the intention, I was advised at that stage, approximately 24 hours ago, would be to move the writ today. However, I was informed earlier that the writ would not be moved today. If the Honourable Lady is asking me, the Chair, whether I am clear as to when the writ will be moved, the honest answer is that I am not aware. It is certainly regrettable for the Right Honourable Lady to have received information privately which transpired not to be borne out by events. If she was given to understand that it would be moved and it wasn't, and it indeed has not been, that is regrettable. I suggest that her best recourse is directly to approach the Government Chief Whip on this matter. Thank you. Yes, indeed. A point of order, Mr. Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Many of us here have visited Richard Ratcliffe, now in his 12th day of a hunger strike in support of his wife Nazanin, wrongly in jail in Tehran. And the number of messages, flowers and visitors show that this House and this country is strongly in sympathy of the Radcliffe family's long ordeal. Is there anything that you can do, sir, to spread the word that other members visiting him would be extremely welcome?
I agree with the honourable gentleman. I think it would be very welcome if members had time and felt inclined to visit Richard Ratcliffe. You know, I'm not in the business of announcing my travel plans, and the honourable gentleman wouldn't expect me to do so. But I have heard what he said, and I have my own thoughts on that matter. And I think I've indicated that I think it a very good idea, and it would be very welcome if members from across the House, simply as human beings to another human being, felt inclined to demonstrate solidarity and support. I agree unreservedly with the honourable gentleman, and I rather imagine I shall be having another conversation with him at a later date to tell him more. Yes, indeed. Point of order, Geraint Davis.
Speaker, you know people travel far and wide to go into Prime Minister's question time. I today have got the Imam from the University Mosque, Sheikh Mossim, and his colleague Mahabub Basha here today. And I was wondering, given people have to travel so far and the public and private travel networks aren't that great, whether you might consider in the future the possibility of delaying the start time of PMQs to enable more people to travel from further afield to view these proceedings.
Well, that's an ingenious idea. I'm not sure if it were a divisible proposition before the House that it would necessarily command a majority. The reason why I say that is that I noticed some furrowed brows at the suggestion that we should start late. We often start late anyway, because I am keen to ensure that backbenchers have a full opportunity at the previous session. Moreover, the honourable gentleman is a discerning and observant fellow, and I feel sure that he will have noticed that I often also allow a very full opportunity for backbenchers at Prime Minister's questions. So I suppose what I would say is, even if someone is a bit late for Prime Minister's questions, there's quite a good chance that they'll still witness a goodly proportion of it. So I will reflect on the honourable gentleman's idea, but I would say to him that he shouldn't ring me, and I can't guarantee to ring him. Point of order, Mr. Robert Courts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm always troubled when I hear any allegation of bad faith in this chamber. And today we've heard an allegation of an honourable member having made, I think, a career out of lying. Would you guide me, please, on whether it is in order for honourable members to accuse others of lying?
I didn't hear any allegation of dishonesty. I didn't hear that. If there was an allegation of dishonesty, I didn't hear it. I heard another word used, which I don't think was particularly tasteful, but which I did not judge to be disorderly. But what I would say to the honourable gentleman, apart from obviously that I can rule only on that which I hear there and then, and there was a great deal of noise in the chamber, is this. If there is to be an allegation of dishonesty against a member, that allegation should be made on a substantive motion. That is the long-established procedure in this House. It should not otherwise be done. And I've given an answer. If the honourable gentleman's point of order is on the same matter, it's on a completely unrelated, totally unrelated matter. Very well, I'm happy to hear it, but that's the answer to the honourable gentleman. Such allegations should be made on substantive motions and not otherwise. That's the answer. And as far as each individual situation is concerned, then obviously the Chair has to deal with the circumstances as he, or in the case of one or other of my deputies, she finds those circumstances. Point of order, James Heapy.
Thank you very much, sir. On Monday, we passed legislation setting net zero as our target for decarbonisation by 2050. It's a hugely important thing to have done, and our constituents are very interested in the matter. Mr. Speaker, you've done great things to make the proceedings of this House more intelligible to the public beyond, and websites like They Work For You have done likewise. Yet because there was no division on Monday, the unanimous support of that legislation will go unrecorded by They Work For You. At a time when the public think our politics is hopelessly divided, I wonder if you agree that at moments when the House is unanimous for its support in legislation like that, They Work For You should record those matters, not just the occasions on which we disagree.
Well, we're not responsible here, and the Chair is certainly not responsible for the modus operandi of They Work For You. If memory serves me correctly, there will have been wording at the bottom